Good evening. My name is Johanna Koljonen and you are watching Crosstalks, a collaboration between two of Sweden's leading universities, Stockholm University and KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology. You can join us in discussing today's topics on Twitter, where our handle is CrosstalksTV and our hashtag is Crosstalks. Humans are drawn to things of beauty. The design of the things around us, be it products, rooms or buildings, are affecting us in profound ways. But design is of course not only about looks, but about usability and utility. How do looks and surfaces affect user experience? Are there universal rules of beauty? What does the design of the things around us say about human nature and social structures? And how does our life in the digital world change the way we interact with physical objects and spaces? Joining us in the studio to discuss these topics are Dr. Charlie Gullström, Research Leader at KTH Smart Spaces, Architecture and Interactive Media at KTH Royal Institute of Technology, Konrad Tollmar, Associate Professor at KTH Royal Institute of Technology, and Stina Hagelqvist, Senior Lecturer and Researcher at the Department of Art History, Stockholm University. Please give them a warm welcome. Thank you. So, Charlie, you're an architect working with interactive media, and already here I'm a little confused. Architects, I thought, design houses.
Well, I was a practicing architect for 15 years before I came back to academia. But if you think of it, architecture is really about bringing people together, people who want to interact, having something to do together. And in a very short period of time, communications technology has transformed the way we can interact and relate to each other. It's transformed the way we work, the way we live, and buildings increasingly now can also help to support people who are not in the same spaces but who want to communicate. This area of research is called presence research, and so now I design mediated spaces. I try to help people you can say we extend buildings to other locations. Virtual spaces.
I got it. So it's both about thinking about virtual spaces in terms of rooms, but it's also very much about making physical buildings actually interface somehow virtually with each other.
Yeah, I use the term mediated spaces because really it's a combination of the real spaces where you and I are now. We have our feet here, but we can still communicate with people who are not here. So virtual space and real space becomes mediated space.
We're going to have to talk more about this, I feel, because I'm still a little bit confused, but it is super, super interesting. So Stina Hagelqvist, as an art historian, you focus on how people relate to design and how it affects us. Historically, design has been a way not only to make practical things look good, essentially, but design is also kind of ideological. Inherently, design choices can serve agendas like a process of civilization or communicating optimism about the future. Could you tell us some examples of this, in case this feels like a strange idea?
There are several examples. Just looking at the early 20th century and the development of housing and housing estates and how we designed kitchens, for example, from the beginning of the 20th century. There's been a way of not only making our home environment work better, it's also a way of civilizing the inhabitants of the apartments and enhance their sort of living experience. This can be both sort of oppressive, but it's also emancipating in some way. So,
could you give us a specific example of that? Because I'm not sure whether I have been civilized by my kitchen or not. So what kinds of changes?
For example, how you design or organize the different cupboards and benches and the sink and the stove. In the way you organize it, in which order you need to do things are designed. And this was organized already in the 1920s or even earlier than that. And there were research institutes who developed ideas and plans of how the housewife was about to move in these spaces. So it's a way of sort of making a life better, but it's also a way of making your life move in certain directions and not others.
In a really physical, practical way through design. I'm realizing also as you're saying this, of course, whether or not kitchens are big enough to have tables in them and is another thing. Do you eat in a dining room or do you eat in a kitchen is also a life-changing choice, even though we think of that as a cultural choice or tradition or something, not as a design choice.
But it is a design choice. Because if you design a kitchen that is too small to put a table in, you need to eat somewhere else. And this was a very planned decision in the 1930s, when you didn't want people to eat in the kitchen, but in other places, and you needed to make a kitchen so small also, so you didn't have a place to put a bed in, so they could avoid having more people living in their apartments than was sort of thought of and planned. So it is a design decision. It is a strange
combination of being oppressed and liberated at the same time.
Exactly.
Konrad, you have, among other things, studied how artifacts can be used to create emotional closeness in long-distance personal communications. Could you explain what you found out, and also what this means? Because I think that makes me think of things like love letters. Is that an artifact of long-distance personal communication?
But I think it's more along the lines with what Charlotte talked about. And I actually took a thing with me. I would like to show it and share it with you.
Thank you. It feels like I'm holding. It feels like a stone, and but it's shaped, and it feels like it's warm from your hand. And there's a sort of metal. I don't know. It's an almond-shaped metal piece here that fits my thumb very well.
Put it in your hand.
I'm putting it in my hand.
So you can see it as a mobile phone that is designed as a stone, but you can also see it as a stone that could communicate.
Is this a mobile phone?
Could be.
Is this a device?
Could be. So the idea.
Is this an aesthetic prototype, or will it actually buzz me in a little while?
We have both versions of it.
Okay.
This is the non-functional version.
Oh, thank you.
But the basic idea here is simply that you hold this device in your hand, press it, and a connected stone will heat up. And that in that way you share this experience of being connected, but in an ambient way, in a very subtle way. And this is kind of what we learn when we talk to people, that in the kind of communication mist that we live in today, that, well, people would like to have other forms of communication, more ambient forms of communication that is more direct, connecting people like that. And
I love it, but I have to ask, remind me again, what's your discipline? What's your subject?
Oh, I'm in mobile computing, so I design mobile technologies and tools.
Are you allowed to do things like this in mobile technology? It seems too human, I almost say. But I guess that's a clue, that I think that I would react like that is actually a clue to what you're describing.
That's very nice of you to say. But I mean, what we have done also along these lines is to look into other forms like light and haptics. And see
haptics means movement.
Sense, like
sense-based.
Sense-based interaction. So and how that also could convey this more human connection between people in a more subtle way.
Have you reached results? Do you know? Is this, for instance, I don't know, would this create a stronger emotional bond between you and me than just calling each other every once in a while?
It do, actually. I mean, we have, this is not a functional version of it, but we have built functional versions of both this and connected lamps and so forth. And a bit interesting, what we learn from those is that they kind of increase the amount of communication. So, and there is this kind of well-known media theory that new media doesn't really replace old media. It's more add-on. So Marshall McLuhan's theory was that new media is extensions of old media. And I think this is kind of what we've seen as well. So when we had these connected lamps in people's house, we also noticed that they called each other more frequently.
And connected lamps would be lamps that, so if I light the lamp in my house, it will also go on in your house?
Yes.
So you'll know when I came home. It will feel like I came home.
If you want me to know that you come home, of course, that's another part of it. But if you do, then that would mean that.
It feels like we're building up a very personal relationship here, and we just met it. So it's very strange. But I see how this could work. Do you guys find this relevant to your research interests?
Well, this is like Konrad was saying, he's talking about the buildings, of course, and these are sensors and actuators that today are completely available. They cost like $2 to embed behind your curtain, for example. So that's why I'm saying that this is an issue that architects can also engage in and should. It used to be that architects only design those buildings, and then people like Konrad or systems architects would come in. They've stolen our title. They call themselves system architects.
You were there first. Yeah.
So now it's really making it very accessible to everyone to augment or to create mixed reality spaces in your office or in your home environment.
Stina, what does this make you think? Is this very different from what we've always done, or is it kind of exactly the same thing?
Both, I think. It's sort of both a qualitative difference, but it's also some kind of extension, I think. As you said, new media is extensions of old media, and the more media we have, the more we use it. So I think both.
Yeah.
Really.
So, Charlie, you're working with something that you call mixed reality spaces. Is this now the same thing as the mediated space that we mentioned before?
There are many names for this. Yeah.
I think we may have a picture. Yes, okay. I thought that would help me, but I may need a little elucidation. Actually.
Well, this is drawn straight from our prototyping right now. We work in an EU project with several researchers in different countries, and we meet not using Skype. We meet in our own prototype. And while normally we use our laptops or our phones to communicate, the point is now that we can use other surfaces, we can project things in our everyday spaces, but we can bring people in quite easily because today we work with web-based systems. It's called WebRTC, which is a new open standard, which means that there are no applications to download, there's no hardware needed. So here, these are actually live video streams. This is just a snapshot. And what we can do in a live video stream today, we can draw, we can twist, we can make ourselves larger and smaller.
Wait, hang on. Is this a picture from your meeting?
This is a picture from our meeting. Yeah, we're playing around a little bit here, obviously. We're drawing hats, and the film is actually on our website. So if you go to compete.eu, you will be able to see this film. But because we chose here, I chose an image which is the Fun Palace from the 1960s in London, a project which was actually dreamt of as a responsive system, which is really what I'm saying, that we will be creating parallel workspaces for people. This can be a 3D environment where we can do things in this virtual space. We can combine these live streams, we can store and represent things from our everyday office that happens in here, and then we can do other things in these spaces where we are together. So it becomes a parallel world that is maybe solving the frustrations we have today in the workplace, because we don't know where anyone is any longer. The office used to be the place where you go in the morning. But no one is there when you come there. They're always somewhere else.
Yeah.
So we do doodle. We get all these devices that he has in his pockets. But it doesn't help us. We're frustrated because we don't know where people are.
And they could always be inside on my screen.
You could
which
declare
could be
your
my
presence. You could show people when you want to have this ambient presence, like Konrad was referring to. There can also be like a shadow on a wall or a lamp that lights up. But by bringing these things together in such user-friendly systems that we're working on nowadays.
So what are the major challenges? Is this an easy list? Will you have solved this in a few months, or when can we do this?
Well, in my case, I have to bring the media industry together with the building industry, so that's a challenge. But
yes.
In a way, I think there are some big differences between how we normally work in architecture, because in architecture you design first, and then you hand over to the building industry in a way. Whereas here we're working with media and interactive media. We do prototyping as we go. so we can transform things based on what people actually need, what people want to be doing. We can change our prototyping.
Konrad, what does this make you think?
Well, I think this is great.
It feels like you're doing almost exactly the same thing, except you're concentrating on the home private sphere more.
A bit more, and maybe that's related to my specialty in mobile computing. But I think what's interesting here is also how this kind of mixed hybrid public and private spaces could meet, and how you can do different things. Like you used to be like at work in a more public way, and at home in a more private way. So it was very clear separation between these two. With this new media, there isn't. This separation has completely broken up. And even if I used a bit slightly simpler tool this morning, I had colleagues from all over Europe in my home this morning.
Yeah.
So they were from Italy, France, England, etc.
But when you think about it, that distinction between the home and the workplace is only a few hundred years old. So this is, in a way,
yes.
I feel incredibly threatened by the idea that I would always be at work.
Yeah.
I think it's terrifying.
Yeah.
I am also worried that all of this technology would be very ugly and it would be an aesthetic imposition on my life.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand that this is maybe that it's all a matter of perspective, and it wouldn't necessarily need to be either. As you say, it can be quite beautiful. Integrated better.
Well, you have to set up those walls that Stina was talking about, that architects always set up before in the kitchen, for example. You have to declare which spaces are open for you and your friends, and which are your workspaces. But it's more complicated now, because we are both in the virtual spaces and in our physical spaces. And that makes it more difficult to actually know, how do you want to meet with me next time? It's a negotiation that is all the time taking place. Right now, we don't know if it's okay to skip that flight to go to London. Is it okay to take a Skype call instead? We don't know.
So there are some cultural needs that we need to figure out, some social scripts around this stuff as well. I'd like to introduce another topic in the conversation before we move on, and that's the question of taste, because I am making aesthetic judgments and everything we're talking about all the time. Stina, can you explain what taste is?
From a theoretical perspective, you could say that taste is an ability to make distinctions, to make choices. It's not a feeling. It's something you do in action, but it's something that feels natural, but it's actually acquired, and that you acquire over time from your child, through going through school and getting grown up. But sort of it comes natural.
But there's an element of preference. I mean, when I say taste, or is it just how we talk about it? I mean that I prefer some things over other, and I think I'm right as well.
That's part of the concept, isn't it? You think it's right, but it doesn't necessarily be right for someone else. It's very individual, cultural, and it's something that is socially constructed and belongs to different groups, different individuals. But it feels like it's natural.
I'm going to force you to answer the question during this conversation whether there are objectively beautiful things. But I'm going to bring in another person into the conversation right now. On Skype, joining us is Dr. Deana McDonagh, professor of industrial design in the School of Art and Design at the University of Illinois, which is a partner university both to Stockholm University and KTH. Welcome to Crosstalks.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you.
Deana, you have said that industrial designers have so much fun that almost everybody who gets a peek at what you do wants to join you. Why is that?
Well, I think we have the best job on the planet. Let's start there. And I've got to tell you, I have been delighted by the conversation that's taking place here. I feel like I'm missing a party, so I really wish I was there in person. Industrial design is, especially in England and in America, it's one of the best kept secrets. It's everything we touch from the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep. And the material landscape, the landscape that we construct over a lifetime, can empower you or it can strip you of dignity. And I think for designers, we have an opportunity, as do architects, as do technologists, scientists and engineers, to actually bring delight into everybody's life in a very seamless way. And I love what you're talking about with technology, because the home is going to become the segue between the hospital, the medical doctor, and your own private landscape. So technology is really going to be embedded in almost everything we wear, sit on, walk on, and it's an opportunity, and it is frightening, and it's got to be managed. It's got to be managed with empathy, and our emotional needs are beginning to be understood more.
Is there? I mean, but you're talking about things like delight and making life better for. And I mean, I love that this is all a part of design, but I also have this feel that a big part of the 19th century, maybe the industrial production of things, wasn't necessarily focused on my delight and my happiness. And when did this become part of your job?
I am an empathic design research strategist, so I look at needs beyond the functional. And I think with the technology boom, I think companies realize that technology doesn't sell anymore. The object has to emotionally connect with people, because you can buy technology and it's like an unwanted Christmas present. It can remain sat looking at you, and it's abandoned, or it's underused, or it's misused. And I think there is a movement towards fewer objects that have meaning, and objects that go throughout, who join you on this journey of what we call life. And I think, here on campus, we have engineers and scientists that are coming to me and talking in these terms. How do I make this technology speak more emotionally? And emotional needs go beyond, is it pretty, is it tasteful? They're cultural, they're social, they're aspirational. They're all the things that can't be measured. And so as industrial designers, that's the fun part for me, because it's the bridge between the tangible world and the world that enables and empowers the individual, so we can age in place, so we can age with dignity, and we can empower others but not being able to access a building is only part of the story. It's so much more.
Charlie?
But I mean, there's no contradiction between technology and beauty. I would hate it if we were now saying that design is that little extra cream on the cake that makes everything pretty, because that's not, I don't think anyone of us believe that that's what the role of design or the role of designers is, to contribute that. When you set the theme for this talk, form follows function is what I read, and that's Louis Sullivan over 100 years ago. And I'm sure as well Deana agrees that that was beauty in the creation of the first cast iron technology that produced the first skyscrapers. But that was really groundbreaking.
That was beautiful, but surely maybe I'm just making aesthetic judgments now.
Well, I wanted to bring to this was that beauty comes from within a professional discourse, that the fostering that takes place as an individual or within a professional group means that we consider certain things right or almost right or just right. And
you designers or all humans?
It is a little bit different. Here we brought industrial design in, and I'm an architect, so we have these. Everyone belongs to some groups like this. You start to be acquainted with the rules that guide that profession, and you become part of it. It's difficult to go out.
Well, yeah, no. I mean, I think also we have to realize that technology, even newer technology today, could be fairly ugly and clunky. And I very much agree upon that. A lot of these things are like unwishful Christmas gifts that you get and you don't really know what to do. And it sits there and it's kind of... So, when we have done more ethnographic-based studies in people's homes and looked upon how people relate to technology and communication, We have also been surprised a bit that people don't really talk so much about it. What they talk about in their homes is more like things that they care about, and it's very often objects that has personal memories embedded into them. And there might be something here that where you can actually bridge sort of this old experience and old emotional connection with things and new capabilities that you can use somehow in design.
Can I just dive in there? 'Cause, it's really fascinating. I think design, I am not saying at all that designers are mere stylists. I'm saying that design now is about generating positive experience.
I would agree. And then that goes back to the sort of form follows function thing. I'm trying to think of an example of a truly functional thing that I would also consider ugly. I cannot immediately think of one. But maybe, and perhaps then the problem with technology is quite often that the interfaces are not great. That there's a lot of the emotions connected to technology, certainly the earlier generations of stuff that we've been using, is connected to frustration or stress or anxiety about work. And maybe that's, to what degree do you think that, I mean, if I'm using a technology in my professional life, making it more invisible or seamlessly integrating it into my home, isn't that just going to bring the work stress home? Or is that going to take some of that bad emotion away from the thing? Which do you think is likelier? Stina?
Depends on where and when you live, I think. If you look back at the 19th century, new technology was top of the line. You used it as showpieces to show that you were sort of modern. And we regard 19th century design today as very ugly, generally. And we regard them as over-decorated. But during the late 19th century, when industrialism broke through, of course, this was very modern and very interesting for people who could afford new pieces of furniture, new kinds of porcelain and cutlery and things like that. So what is ugly and what is beautiful and what is functional doesn't necessarily need to be practical. I mean, beauty doesn't need to be practical and function doesn't need to be in relation to utility, but it's also a symbolic function.
Yeah, so one symbolic function could be, for instance, to demonstrate that I have time or money or
taste.
Or yes, and taste. And there we are again
the
with
right
taste. It still feels to me like we have two different, because there is an ideal here. Well, one is that taste can be anything you want, and the other is that certain things are beautiful because they work. Is there a conflict between these two or not? I can't put my finger on it.
Well, I think also another aspect of this discussion is that if you have things which you embed computers into and they start to be able to communicate with other things, I mean, you have two different kinds of design. You have like a physical design of the actual artifacts, but you also have an interior design of the service and how these digital properties could be accessed and used. And these are quite different from each other.
Yeah, and if it's a communicating device, also the design of the interaction itself with this hypothetical other entity at the other end. Yes, I see. And some of those could be good and bad in different combinations.
Yeah, but then it's up to the people who, the social group, let's say, or the family who can decide for themselves what will it mean. Because I think it's really in the meaning. That's where we differ between individuals. That some people like it that way. That's what you're talking about with taste, I think. So what is really amazing now when you see 12-year-olds opening their Arduino toolkit or so, they can start embedding devices into the environment, and they can decide that when that happens, then this is what it means to me. So I think society is really changing and helping us maybe to loosen up those conventions that are obviously there. from
And then
history.
you're also saying that everyone will be a designer in a practical sense of the physical, or many more people will be designers of our sort of media environments and our physical environments than is the case today.
Yeah, well, people will be co-creating, I think, much more than they have been able to.
I guess we always had the choice we had a sort of consumer choice. We could always, whatever resources were available to us, we could choose between some options, and these are often constructed as aesthetic choices. Because I'm assuming you would still agree that we do make aesthetic judgments or design. We choose between different designs also to demonstrate our individuality, right? That's still true, right?
Yeah, that's still true. Just I think when we're speaking about design, it's quite a broad field, and sometimes I'm thinking about the designer as meeting a client's need or trying to interpret users' needs into the future, for example. That's then you really work as a professional in response to a specific context. That product that comes out of that process after a year or so maybe goes out into mass production. And then you go and buy it, and you can say you like it or you don't. And that's it's quite a broad field, design, in that sense.
Yeah.
That when we get into our tasks, we're thinking of a particular context, but it might end up with a completely different meaning to someone else.
And also there's this thing about pace now, because the technologies are changing so incredibly fast. So even between a first idea and the time to market, even the meanings, the context of the thing might have changed quite a lot as well. How much do you guys think that the practice of the designer is being affected by the rapid pace of technological change? Does it, or is the craft fundamentally always the same, or does your job change because of this, Konrad?
Well, I'm doing the software part, so my kind of world always changed.
Yeah.
And this is sort of what I think is a bit different from maybe what it used to be, that these internal use qualities, you can always change them afterwards. You can always come up with new interpretation of what this thing or what this device is actually doing for you. And you can even think that the use of this or the design of the artifact happens in the use. So the material becomes so dynamic, so it always continuously change. And there could be even a group of people that do this together. So we are a group of people that are online, and we kind of work on this software together, and we kind of together decide what it should do and how it should do things.
So let's see if I'm trying to translate this to practical things in my home. We were talking about objects that could be learning from me while I'm using it and changing, or about things that could be reprogrammable, for instance, or where I would maybe reuse the components when I tire of the thing or its function, something has changed, so it's not functional anymore because of contextual reasons. Yeah. I could take it to pieces and then reassemble it as something else, perhaps.
Yeah, and there are many mixed versions of this also. I mean, you can think of this combo we have now about new types of printing, and that you maybe in the future, or in the fairly soon future, you have a 3D printer back home, and you can sort of use that one to print the stuff you need. And maybe you do that with your friends. You design things together that you print together.
Deana, would you like to come in on this?
Sorry, yeah, could I comment on that? I deal with a lot of students with pretty profound physical disabilities, and one of the projects we have right now is looking at computerized, prosthetics, computerized legs, and they're not the shape of the other leg, the human leg. They're very computerized and very robotic, and so the industrial designers are trying to develop a wraparound so it gives dignity. It doesn't hide the fact that it's not a real leg, but it kind of helps to promote the personality of the person that has this leg. And we're trying to destigmatize. And the other point I want to make is that technology, not only is it going to be all around us, it's going to be in us. It's going to be embedded. And I think our relationship with technology, for example, a pencil is a piece of technology and it's very inaccessible. I had students draw with their feet last week, all industrial designers, just so they knew what it was like not to have these hands working for them. And I've got to tell you, their relationship with that piece of technology, that pencil, was kind of remarkable. And I think it's a very interesting space, but it can be easily abused if we don't manage it and own it.
There is, yeah, Charlie.
Yeah, just in architecture, there has been a tremendous shift and change, because to date, programming was all about the design process, that AutoCAD or the software to help us design or produce our drawings. That's where we put our emphasis in terms of ICT so far. And now this is changing, because now, of course, we can make the building responsive. We can program the building, and we can have feedback from the way users actually walk around and use the building. And that's very interesting feedback to the designers, to the architectural designers as well. So here we can really learn from how in interaction design, industrial design, have a much more continuous and dynamic flow, I think. We've been much more dividing between the drawing part and the building part.
How important is this kind of thinking? I mean, how important is the environmental aspect to everything you're talking about now? Because there are some rather harsh design limitations put on all of us just from the fact that we are at a civilization-threatening crisis point, and we'll have to change how we do pretty much everything in our lives. Does that come into this thing that you're talking about, or are there different professionals working on solving those problems? Konrad?
Well, I think both. I read a question earlier on we had when we discussed this a bit about whether like beautiful things or whether things become more beautiful if they were kind of environmentally friendly. And I'm not so convinced about that yet, unfortunately. But I think there is a moment also where we can learn, and coming back to this, like where you can print stuff yourself and design stuff yourself. Just imagine that instead of throwing your garbage away, that you can actually reuse material. So when your kids grow, you reuse the teachers and just print new ones, which slightly larger ones.
Yeah.
And if you can create this kind of cycle, then it will definitely have a much more meaning that it could help us and make things more beautiful in a way.
Or, I was going to say, if we're saying beautiful, maybe we should also say ugly, because you can also imagine a lot of ugly things in the world coming out of those.
Yeah.
But fun.
Stina?
But I do think that sustainability is a very important aspect when choosing objects or choosing processes, and when you make decisions about how you live. And I don't think it's necessarily an added value. It's sort of a very necessary value or aspect of design that I think actually people do choose instead of choosing something else.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't really agree, because I think if you look upon, there are clothes companies that nowadays brand themselves to have organic fabrics and so forth, and that organic food is also, something that we start to become aware of. But a lot of us, we unfortunately don't think so much when we swap our phone, for example. We don't think so much what kind of material that our new iPhone is made out of, and so forth. So
but we
when
should.
when
we
coming
must.
to that kind of technology, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
And I think maybe if we can use new fabrics, for example, when we do electronics, if we can make soft material, you can more stitch your iPad, then you maybe get other qualities in those.
Charlie?
Well, I think it's all about actually changing behavior, human behavior, and I think design has an important role in that, definitely. But also that if we can get feedback as users immediately and not have to wait till the end of the month when the bill comes, for example, to know how much water did I consume today. People are quite keen on sort of measuring, and that can make people adapt and change their behavior much faster, I think, if you equips people and their buildings the way people like to monitor anyway.
And
their
so
movements.
part of this is about designing behaviors, also lowering thresholds. I was thinking when Deana said before about integrating healthcare into the home in some ways, I would get so much more healthcare earlier if it wouldn't require me to go to a physical place and sit in a line with other sick people, which isn't a smart thing to do when you're sick. I think there are also some sort of structural benefits you can liberate energy and resources to solve problems elsewhere by these kinds of solutions. And that's also a design of kind of social societies somehow. Deana?
Could I mention emotional sustainability? Because just because it's made out of bamboo does not mean it's sustainable. You know, I think the emotional sustainable refers to the fact that let's own fewer objects. You know, I've been a real advocate for let's invest when you're young in the car engine, and then as you are single, you have a family and etc. Maybe the chassis, the enclosure of the engine is what changes. You know, I'm not sure why I've had to go through so many cars, and it's similar to the phone. And I think it is a mindset, but I think we're getting to a critical mass. When I was young, people who recycled were a throwback from the Second World War. They were seen as eccentric. And now the culture is, if you don't recycle, you're not only seen as eccentric, you're actually seen as an outcast.
Yeah.
And I think we're beginning to demand this. You know, people are not throwing clothes away anymore. They're giving them to goodwill and they're being transformed. They're given to the poor, etc., etc. I think we're more mindful than ever.
And that makes us mindful of quality as well, inevitably.
Quality is essential.
Yeah. We are ready, I think, for questions from the audience. If we have questions from the audience, this is a wide and ranging topic, but you may have thoughts on the future of design or questions. Or you have all of these amazing designers and art historians who can help you solve any problems you have. Do we have a question? There's a slightly worried silence. Do we? Slightly worried. Yes. And please state your name and affiliation.
Dan Johansson from Stockholm Academic Forum.
Welcome.
Yeah, I was just thinking about technology and empathy. How can one design technology to make leaders more empathic today?
Our leaders, you mean?
Politicians.
Oh, that's a big challenge.
To assist them in their decisions and so on.
Very nice. Thank you, Dan. Okay, class, we have established a massive design challenge, but this is really interesting. I think maybe this is how we start. How do we design something that could make political decision-making more empathetic, I guess? Anyone with any kind of agree, please begin. Any idea, please begin. Does anyone have anything?
Well,
Yes.
my area is empathy. And so I feel as if the burden is on me to begin to try and answer that question. It's a wonderful question. It's complex. I think it's more cultural. We've got to have cultural codes and cultural imprints where we're in an empathy economy. Let's start there. And I think the shift of the mentality, we're asking for more empathic technology and more products that are empathic for the user. So I think there is a shift there. As for making our leaders more empathic, I think they have to be a little bit sociopathic to want to be leaders in the first place. So maybe what we should do is elect people that really don't want to be in those positions because they probably have more empathy.
So let's see, you're suggesting that we hack the current system by rewarding different kinds of behavior. Okay, I accept this. It's a good strategy. Does anybody else have another approach? How would you start approaching something like this? Konrad?
Well, of course, you can design communication media. So, I mean, communication is a form of, you can make that more empathic by having a more directness towards the one that you talk for. And I think the new media today, what it could do, and what it has already done in a way, is that it sort of closed the gaps between us and the sort of politics or the decisions makers. There is a closer distance between these two now, and that will definitely continue. And we can still develop new media and communication media in a way so people are more engaged into decisions making and so forth.
Yeah, I would like to say that maybe not everything needs to be solved with technology either. Maybe they can get out there on the floor and meet people. But social media has, I think, in many ways helped the politicians, because they do get feedback, and they probably read it as well, more than we can imagine.
Stina.
You can also ask the question about what is empathic today. We know today what it is. Going back 100 years, that was something else. So concept change. And in the 50 years ahead of us, maybe we think of empathy in another way that we think of it as today. We don't know really. So what we put in concepts like empathy or creativity or design always changes.
Yeah, I just read somewhere that workhouses, which were essentially prisons for the poor, were intended, very well intentioned, as a sort of, I guess, an empathetic gesture. Today we don't read it like that.
No.
But it's very interesting. Everything we're talking about kind of brings us back to ultimately somehow to changing behaviors or enabling behaviors through design. But you're not quite coming out and saying it. You're saying that design is changing behaviors, or design is generating behaviors, or there are user behaviors or user experiences that are being generated. But is it a little bit controversial in design to say, well, actually, we just want to make people behave in certain ways, and therefore we design things? I mean, you don't do it in that way
I
so
think
often.
We might hesitate a bit because we don't really know where this leads us. But of course, pervasive design, actually changing people's habit with different kind of communication technologies, is an area where we work in, and especially in healthcare and well-being. We have all these kind of mobile apps, things like that should help us to understand what we do and what we don't do, and maybe change our habits.
Urban planning to
Yes.
enable people to walk more. I mean, we are all the time, designers are changing behaviors. Yeah. Could you come out and say it and be a utopian designer and say, well, I'm going to design for the society that I want to see?
I think all the designers and architects are actually aware that we are imposing something, but that might not be a bad thing either. You can do it respectfully, but you need to admit. I think you're right there. You need to admit that you are changing people's lives. There is a wall there, or it's here, and it will matter. Also, if it's in the virtual space, there is a wall there.
Oh, I'm not critical of this. I'm actually suggesting you should do more of it.
But I think, I mean, also we are refining our sort of our methodologies for engaging people in the design process, and I think that's very important. I mean, there are so many good and interesting ways of involving people, where you get feedback and where things do get better. Also, if it takes longer, I think sometimes time is really not our best friend here, because we're trying to get things out so quickly. But if there was a bit more time and more iterations in the prototyping, things might get even better.
And yes, and involving the society or the end users more would make it ethically more acceptable to say that you're actually working in a utopian manner. We're running out of time. So I just want to do a quick round for people who now may be selecting their field of study or selecting a field of specialization. What do you think personally is the most exciting design field today? If you were, let's say, around 20 and making a choice, what would you go into now? What's the thing that makes you super excited today? Let's start with Deana.
I didn't know about industrial design. I didn't know about empowering people, which is guiding people's behavior. I think medical products and the home as a total entity is going to be very exciting. It brings in kinesiology, psychology, human factors engineering. That's the sweet spot for me.
Yeah, an amazing potential or impact for such a huge number of people as well, of course. I think they all do, maybe perhaps Charlie.
Well, I teach architecture students, and I do it very happily, and I'm not going to say anything else than, go into architecture, but really to absorb the possibilities of the virtual, the integration of the virtual to the physical environment. I think that's there is so much more to explore there.
So pick architecture, but pick your school very carefully.
That that too.
Yeah? Okay, interesting. Konrad.
Well, I have to say the same, I guess. I mean, for me, interaction design is sort of where we see a lot of the big potentials today in changing what we do and how we use things, quality in life, etc. And however, we need to understand more what is sort of the quality and experience and quality and service, etc. This is something that we barely have understood. I mean, this whole new area with mobile phones and internet, I mean, think about it, is maybe 2 decades old. And as humans, we barely are in the sort of end of the beginning somewhere. We don't really know where this will lead us. But for sure, that's interaction design is my choice.
Very well. And what about Stina? Where would you go today?
Well, I don't really belong to the design field, so it's hard for me to recommend
You
anything.
think about design.
But I'm sort of, my research sort of, as an art historian, I sort of stand on the outside looking in at the design field and at architecture and art history. And I would say to young people to study sort of visual studies and learning how to read visual images, moving images, buildings, environments, in order to understand how the logic works and why things look as they do, and what was the thought behind it, and what design wants us to do, in order to be slightly a bit more critical. I think young people today are immensely critical, but as a way of learning how to orientate in a world that is very, very visual and very, very designed. Everything around us today is designed. So sort of can have a bit of a distance and a critical stance towards it.
Thank you very much. That concludes our conversation because the time is up. Thank you, Charlie Gullström, Stina Hagelqvist, and Konrad Tollmar, and of course with us, Deana McDonagh. Thank you very much. Crosstalks will be back next month with more great minds and intelligent discussions. Be sure to check in at crosstalks.tv for updates on topics and on guests. And until then, be safe and be brave.